Welcome to the wars you've never heard of. The Anglo-Zanzibar War, fought in 1896, holds the record as the shortest war in history, lasting between 38 and 45 minutes. The conflict erupted when Sultan Khalid bin Barghash ascended the throne of Zanzibar without British approval, following the death of Sultan Hamad bin Thuwaini. The British, backing their preferred candidate, Hamad bin Mohammed, issued an ultimatum for Khalid to step down. When he refused, British warships bombarded the palace. Within minutes, the palace was destroyed and Khalid fled, leading to a swift British victory and the installation of their chosen sultan. The Football War, also known as the Soccer War, was a brief but intense conflict between El Salvador and Honduras in 1969. Triggered by national tensions exacerbated by World Cup qualifying matches, the underlying causes included issues of land reform and immigration. Hostilities erupted when Salvadoran military forces invaded Honduras. The war lasted only 100 hours, resulting in significant casualties and displacement before a ceasefire was negotiated by the Organization of American States. The conflict highlighted the deep-seated socio-political issues between the neighboring countries. The Pig War was a border dispute between the United States and the British Empire in 1859, centered on the San Juan Islands. The conflict began when an American settler shot a British-owned pig that had wandered into his garden. This seemingly trivial incident escalated into a military standoff, with both sides dispatching troops to the island. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and the dispute was resolved peacefully without any loss of human life. The boundary was eventually settled in favor of the United States, highlighting the absurdity and tensions of territorial disputes. The War of Jenkinsia, 1739 to 1748, was a conflict between Britain and Spain. The war's peculiar name stems from an incident in which Spanish Coast Guards severed the ear of British Captain Robert Jenkins, who later presented it to the British Parliament as evidence of Spanish aggression. This outrage led to a declaration of war by Britain. The conflict was part of the larger War of Austrian Succession and primarily took place in the Caribbean and Georgia, with significant naval battles and raids marking the hostilities. The Emu War was a bizarre conflict in Australia in 1932, where the military was called in to curb the population of emus wreaking havoc on farmland in Western Australia. Despite using soldiers armed with machine guns, the emus proved surprisingly resilient and difficult to control. The military's efforts were ultimately deemed a failure, leading to an embarrassing retreat and leaving the emu population largely intact. The Emu War remains a curious example of the challenges of wildlife management and the resilience of nature. Thanks for joining us for 60 Seconds of History. Stay tuned for more quick dives into the past. The War of the Stray Dog, or the incident at Petrich, was a brief conflict between Greece and Bulgaria in 1925. It began when a Greek soldier chased a stray dog across the border into Bulgaria and was shot by Bulgarian troops. In retaliation, Greece invaded Bulgaria, leading to a brief but tense military engagement. The League of Nations intervened, and both sides agreed to a ceasefire, with Greece withdrawing its forces and paying reparations to Bulgaria. This conflict underscores the volatility of border tensions and the importance of international mediation. The Cod Wars were a series of confrontations between the United Kingdom and Iceland from 1958 to 1976 over fishing rights in the North Atlantic. Iceland extended its fishing limits, leading to disputes and skirmishes at sea as British trawlers continued to fish in these waters. The conflicts involved ramming incidents and the deployment of naval vessels. The Cod Wars ended with Iceland successfully extending its exclusive fishing zone to 200 nautical miles, setting a precedent for maritime boundaries and significantly impacting international fishing policies. The Paraguayan War, also known as the War of the Triple Alliance, was fought from 1864 to 1870 between Paraguay and the Allied forces of Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. This devastating conflict resulted in immense loss of life, particularly for Paraguay, which suffered significant casualties and economic ruin. The war began over territorial disputes and escalated into one of the bloodiest conflicts in South American history. It ended with a decisive victory for the Triple Alliance and had a lasting impact on the geopolitical landscape of the region. The Pastry War was a conflict between France and Mexico in 1838 to 1839. It began when a French pastry chef in Mexico City claimed Mexican officers had damaged his shop, demanding compensation. France backed the claim and, when Mexico refused to pay, blockaded Mexican ports and seized the city of Veracruz. The conflict ended with Mexico agreeing to pay the indemnity, illustrating how seemingly minor incidents could escalate into international disputes and the lengths countries would go to protect their citizens' interests abroad. The War of the Oaken Bucket was a conflict between the Italian city-states of Modena and Bologna in 1325. The war started when Modenese soldiers stole a wooden bucket from a well in Bologna, an act that led to the Battle of Zappolino. This battle was part of the larger rivalry between the Guelphs and Ghibellines, factions supporting the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, respectively. The Modenese emerged victorious, and the bucket remains a symbol of their triumph, still displayed in Modena today. The Banana Wars were a series of U.S. military interventions in Central America and the Caribbean from 1898 to 1934. These conflicts were primarily driven by the economic interests of American companies, particularly the United Fruit Company, in the region. The U.S. aimed to protect its investments and maintain political stability favorable to American business operations. These interventions included actions in countries like Honduras, Nicaragua, and Cuba, shaping the political and economic landscape of the region and highlighting the influence of corporate interests on foreign policy. The Aroostook War, 1838 to 1839, was a bloodless border conflict between the United States and the United Kingdom, involving the boundary between Maine and New Brunswick. It began with disputes over timber rights and escalated when both sides raised militias, leading to a tense military standoff. Despite the absence of actual combat, the conflict demonstrated the volatility of border issues. The Webster-Ashburton Treaty of 1842 eventually resolved the dispute, establishing a clear boundary and improving U.S.-British relations. The Fenian Raids, 1866 to 1871, were incursions by the Fenian Brotherhood, an Irish nationalist organization based in the United States, into British-controlled Canada. These raids aimed to capture Canadian territory as leverage for Irish independence from Britain. Although the raids were largely unsuccessful militarily, they had significant political repercussions, influencing Canadian nationalism and the drive for confederation, which eventually led to the creation of the Dominion of Canada in 1867. The Whiskey Rebellion, 1791 to 1794, was an uprising in the United States against an excise tax on whiskey imposed by the federal government. Farmers in western Pennsylvania, who relied on distilling surplus grain into whiskey, viewed the tax as an unfair burden. The rebellion escalated, leading to violent clashes with tax collectors. President George Washington responded by leading a militia force to suppress the rebellion, demonstrating the power of the federal government and establishing a precedent for federal authority over state and local dissent. The Battle of Blair Mountain, 1921, was the largest labor uprising in United States history and the most significant armed insurrection since the Civil War. Miners in Logan County, West Virginia, fought for better working conditions against coal companies' oppressive practices. The conflict saw miners, armed and organized, clashing with company agents and local law enforcement. Federal troops eventually intervened, quelling the uprising. The battle highlighted the desperate conditions of coal miners and played a crucial role in the labor movement. The Boshin War, 1868 to 1869, was a pivotal civil war in Japan between the ruling Tokugawa shogunate and forces seeking to return political power to the emperor. The conflict marked the end of the Tokugawa shogunate and the beginning of the Meiji Restoration, which led to significant political and social changes in Japan. Modernization efforts during this period transformed Japan from a feudal society into a modern state, laying the foundation for its emergence as a major global power. The Xinhai Revolution, 1911 to 1912, was a revolution that overthrew China's last imperial dynasty, the Qing dynasty, and established the Republic of China. Sparked by widespread dissatisfaction with the Qing government's corruption and failure to modernize, the revolution involved numerous uprisings and battles across the country. The fall of the Qing dynasty marked the end of over 2 millennia of imperial rule in China and ushered in a new era of modernization and political reform. The First Anglo-Afghan War, 1839 to 1842, was a conflict between the British East India Company and the Emirate of Afghanistan. The war was part of the Great Game, the strategic rivalry between the British and Russian empires. The British aimed to install a pro-British ruler, Shah Shuja, in Afghanistan. Despite initially capturing Kabul, the British faced a disastrous retreat through the mountains, with nearly the entire force being annihilated. This war highlighted the difficulties of military campaigns in Afghanistan and the region's fierce resistance to foreign intervention. The Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864, was one of the deadliest conflicts in history, occurring in China under the Qing dynasty. Led by Hong Xiuquan, who claimed to be the brother of Jesus Christ, the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom sought to overthrow the Qing government and establish a new, theocratic regime. The rebellion resulted in massive destruction and a death toll estimated to be between 20 to 30 million people. It significantly weakened the Qing dynasty and contributed to the eventual fall of Imperial China. The Cretan War, 1645 to 1669, was a prolonged conflict between the Republic of Venice and the Ottoman Empire over control of the island of Crete. The war saw extensive sieges and naval battles, with the Venetians initially holding out against the Ottomans. However, after 24 years of fighting, the Ottomans captured the island's capital, Heraklion, effectively ending Venetian rule in Crete. This war highlighted the strategic importance of Crete in the eastern Mediterranean and the declining power of Venice. The Sikh Wars, 1845 to 1849, were two conflicts between the Sikh Empire and the British East India Company, resulting in the annexation of the Punjab region by the British. The First Sikh War saw intense battles, including the decisive Battle of Sabrayan, leading to a partial British victory and a treaty. The Second Sikh War broke out due to dissatisfaction with British interference, culminating in the Battle of Gujarat and the complete defeat of the Sikh forces. These wars marked the end of the Sikh Empire and the expansion of British rule in India. The War of the Polish Succession, 1733 to 1738, was a European conflict triggered by a disputed succession to the Polish throne. The war involved major powers, including France, Spain, Austria, and Russia, each supporting different candidates for the Polish crown. The conflict was marked by battles across Europe and strategic alliances. The Treaty of Vienna ended the war, with Augustus III installed as the King of Poland. This war underscored the importance of Poland in European geopolitics and the influence of external powers on its internal affairs. The Russo-Japanese War, 1904 to 1905, was a conflict between the Russian Empire and Japan over rival imperial ambitions in Manchuria and Korea. The war marked the first time an Asian power defeated a European power in modern warfare. Key battles included the Siege of Port Arthur and the Battle of Tsushima, where the Japanese Navy delivered a crushing blow to the Russian fleet. The Treaty of Portsmouth ended the war, with Japan emerging as a significant military power and Russia facing internal unrest that contributed to the 1905 revolution. Thanks for joining us for 60 Seconds of History. Stay tuned for more quick dives into the past.